Well, good afternoon. I'm Joanne Stately, and I'm the Director of Community Impact for Economic Vitality at the Minneapolis Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and helping us continue our 100th anniversary celebration. We're very, very delighted that you're able to join us for this particular workshop that is focusing in my area of concern regarding economic vitality and urban design. We have a very excellent presentation and a great panel of speakers that will be here today. And what I would like to do is to kick off the program and introduce one of our key sponsors for this particular session. And the mic is cutting in and out. Just keep talking. All right, with that, I would like to introduce Mike Korsch, who's the Vice President and Director of Real Estate Development at Kraus Anderson, who will be saying a few words and introducing our speaker. Mike?
It's a pleasure to be here and to share and to celebrate with the foundation, the city leaders, businesses, and neighborhoods that are collaborating to invest in the future of Minneapolis. A great example of that collaboration is one of today's sponsors, Thrivent. Thrivent is a nonprofit financial services organization whose mission is to help its members be wise with money and live generously. And that leads to stronger, healthier communities. Last year alone, Thrivent, its members, and its workforce gave $234 million to churches, schools, charitable organizations, and individuals in need. And those same members and employees volunteered nearly 11 million hours. All of this leads to healthier communities across the nation and right here in Minneapolis. They are a great neighbor and a great client. Thank you, Thrivent. Like Thrivent, Kraus Anderson is a longtime member of downtown Minneapolis. We're excited to be part of the city's future. Right now, we are working with the city, our Elliott Park neighborhood, and our business partners to move ahead with plans for a dynamic mixed-use development on our block. We hope to be under construction early next year with our new headquarters building combining our construction, real estate, and development activities under one roof. In addition, our vision for our block includes high-rise apartments, hotel, restaurant, and a brew-till, combining craft beer, lodging, event center, and collaborative business incubator space. It's now my pleasure to introduce Thomas Fisher, who is the Dayton-Hudson Chair in Urban Design and Director of the Metropolitan Design Center at the University of Minnesota. Mr. Fisher is an eloquent speaker, bringing perceptive insight into our built environment, encompassing architectural design, practice, and ethics. He has been named a top 25 design educator 4 times by the Design Intelligence, and he has lectured at 36 universities and over 150 professional and public meetings in the U.S. His current focus includes architecture and cities in the 21st century. Please welcome Thomas Fisher.
Hello, everyone. Dan Buettner is a tough act to follow, but I'll do my best. I want to talk about the new economy and the impact it's going to have on our cities. But before I do, I just want to step back a little bit and make a broader argument that we are living at a moment in time that's rather unique in human history, and that we are coming to the end of a couple 100-year Ponzi scheme with the planet. We all remember Bernard Madoff and his financial Ponzi scheme, which these work by exploiting people to invest to keep the people at the top of the scheme enriched. And of course, Ponzi schemes work great for those at the top until it runs off the planet, and then the Ponzi scheme collapses, as Bernard Madoff's did, and he's in prison. However, couple things we learned from Bernard Madoff: if the Ponzi scheme's big enough, we don't see it, and secondly, if we have enough invested in it, we deny it. And that is our challenge as a species right now. We have had a Ponzi scheme with the planet. We are off the planet. It now takes 1.5 planets to support us. And as we know from Ponzi schemes, they cannot survive running off the planet. And what we've been doing is we've been exploiting other populations. About 1 billion people on the planet have been exploiting the other 6 billion, mostly people of color. We've been exploiting finite resources, we've been extinguishing species at record rates, and we've been borrowing heavily from the future by using up all of the available oil. And the game is over. We are at a moment in time where we have to figure out how we're going to live in a post-Ponzi scheme world, and that is the world that we're in the process of creating right now. Because I want to talk about a new economy that I want to argue is actually helping us get past this way of being. It's an economy that is wringing the waste out of our system. One of the things about our Ponzi scheme is we have overbuilt our world. We've overconsumed resources. We've overproduced calories, as we just heard from Dan Buettner. We are so far over what we actually need. And what the new economy is going to do is help us better utilize what we already have. And as some people think about this, this is kind of our Gutenberg moment at the same time. We all know from Gutenberg that the printing press had a tremendous effect on not only people's lives, but led to the scientific revolutions, the democratic revolutions, the industrial revolution. It led to the rise of cities. Where it enabled our ancestors to basically have opportunities that weren't available to most people. So one of the things that's happening is a continuation now in our economy of making information accessible to all. And this is how people in power get overthrown. You cannot control information anymore, any more than dictators tried to do that in the past. And that was, of course, one of the impacts of having widely accessible books. And so what is the Gutenberg moment we're in? Well, one way to think about this moment is we are entering what some call a third industrial revolution. And just to sort of remind us of our past, our history, the first industrial revolution, what happened in the 19th century was the mechanization of labor, right? With the steam engine as the kind of iconic invention. And that, of course, led to the rise of industrial cities. It actually was a set of technologies that encouraged people to come together into very large cities to be close to where the production was going on of the industrial base. But this wasn't the only industrial revolution we've had, because we are now coming out of what historians called the second industrial revolution. This was the revolution started by Henry Ford. This was the idea of mass production and mass consumption. And we have been, in our Ponzi scheme, massively consuming resources. And again, exploiting those who we have depended on to enable probably, certainly everybody in this room and the billion or so people on the planet who have done very well. One of the things we don't realize is our cities have reflected this. Suburbs are the perfect urban form for mass consumption. It requires all of us to own a car, buy a lawnmower, buy a snowblower, buy everything. And so what it did is it enabled us to absorb the excess capacity of the mass production that was going on in the second industrial revolution. Of course, it left many people out, right? Many people couldn't move to the suburbs. They couldn't afford this. And so you start to see in both of these industrial revolutions this division between the haves and the have-nots. Poverty became sort of embedded in these, both of these revolutions. And of course, improved people's livelihoods, or many people, our lifespans increased. But what we are in now is what Jeremy Rifkin, the economist, calls a third industrial revolution, driven by mobile digital devices. These things that many of us have in our pockets are having and will have as profound an impact as the printing press. And I'll explain why that is. But one way in which Rifkin talks about this third industrial revolution is it's a shift from owning goods to accessing services. It's a shift from emphasizing competition to seizing collaboration as the opportunity and the way to success. Some economists call this the sharing or collaborative economy. It is one that moves away from concentrating wealth to actually crowdsourcing capital. It's a move away from controlling knowledge to freely distributing it, from hierarchical organizations to social networks, and from a supply and demand economy, the Ponzi scheme economy that I just talked about, to an on-demand economy, an economy that wrings out the waste and actually recognizes that the things that we think we can't afford are actually some of the most valuable things that we have to look for in the future. For example, we cannot afford poverty anymore. Poverty is simply too expensive. I've worked on homelessness issues. It costs 2 to 3 times for a person to remain on the street than to be in supportive housing. Why on earth do we have anybody living on the street? We can't afford to do this anymore. This is the Ponzi scheme that is unsustainable. One of the things that's interesting about this third industrial revolution, it's getting a lot of attention in the business world, but it is also very much generational. This is probably a hard to read graph, but some of the research in this new economy shows that the millennial generation is deeply invested in this economy. About half of millennials basically live their lives now with this economy. And so this is very much our future, however odd it may seem to some of us. They would rather lease an apartment than own a house. They would rather seek rooms via Airbnb than go to a hotel. They'd rather access Uber or Car2Go rather than own a car. Work in a cooperative co-working space rather than a dedicated office. Take courses on Coursera rather than traditional continuing education. Shop on Amazon and Craigslist rather than in a bricks and mortar store. And so you begin to see how a lot of the things that became normalized in the 20th century economy are getting turned on their head, and very quickly. So a lot of the changes we're making will not necessarily change the way things look, but they will be a change in the way we use things, as this somewhat humorous image from The Economist shows, is that we now look at these things as not needing to own them, but to, rent a dog when you need it, rent your lawnmower, share your car, you got a spare bedroom. I mean, think about all of the empty bedrooms in our city. Think about all the empty car seats, seats in our cars. Think about all of the excess space that we heat and cool that sits empty. Think about all the cars that are parked that aren't being used. I mean, the capacity we have, the overcapacity is tremendous. What this economy does is it makes all of that much more accessible, as this slogan from The Economist argues. It's about access rather than ownership. An example of the impact this will have are driverless cars, which I know to many probably seem utopian, but this technology is a couple years away from being commercially viable. Not only is it coming from Google, but Ford, GM, and Toyota are heavily invested in this. What this does, first of all, a quarter of our population can't drive. They're children, they're elderly, they're handicapped, whatever the issue is. So this provides through electric driverless cars, autonomous vehicles, accessibility to a full quarter of our population. The other thing is that these vehicles do not have accidents. All the accidents have been when drivers have run into them. So what this is part of this economy is shifting goods producers to service providers. So what we will have within the decade is we will not own cars. We will have a mobility service contract with Ford, GM, Google, and we will call it up on our phone, and it will take us to where we want to go, and it will move on to pick up the next person. It's a kind of automated taxi service, right? Now think of all of the land we spend warehousing cars. All the surface parking lots, all the parking ramps, all the garages, all the driveways. Think about that excess capacity. Think about all the highways. It turns out that these cars move more quickly through the urban grid than they do a highway. In fact, Arab Engineers, one of the big leading firms that are working on this, envision that our highways in the future will become the places we'll park these things in the middle of the night before we call them up in the morning. So our highways may in fact be the most convenient parking space of all. So you have Car2Go as an example of that. You also have the demand for us to sort of think about what do we do with all of the infrastructure we put in place. This is a parking garage in Miami Beach, which is now being used. It's a very popular place for banquets and other kinds of things. We're going to have to sort of rethink a lot of our infrastructure and a lot of the city that we have built based on the 20th century economy. Let me see here, we'll keep going. So another thing about this, and this is an opportunity for the Twin Cities, this is one of the world's first 3D printed working cars. This was 3D printed in Stratasys out in Eden Prairie. So imagine what Ford and GM are thinking. No wonder they're getting into mobility services, because think about their infrastructure to make cars and how expensive it is versus somebody that could hit the print button and drive the thing away. I mean, this is a radical shift in the empowering of individuals to literally have the means of production put into their hands. We didn't have to fight a war of the proletariat, as Karl Marx anticipated. All we needed to do was develop 3D printing and CNC fabrication. This is an empowering kind of technological shift that enabled people to crowdsource startup companies at a much lower cost than ever before. This is so far the world's tallest 3D printed building. So think about the construction industry with all of its trades. This is much cheaper to build. And a lot of these technologies, however odd they may sound, they're cheaper, they're cleaner, they're safer, and they're faster. And when you have that kind of combination, it's almost impossible to hold on to the past. So part of this is for us to understand what's going on, to recognize the tremendous opportunity here for everybody to engage in an economy that will better utilize resources and empower individuals who in the 20th century were kept out of the ability to participate in the economy because they did not have the capital, they did not have the connections, they weren't empowered as part of the Ponzi scheme. This is an example of the ways in which we will probably be building shelter increasingly in the future. This is a thing called WikiHouse. This is a house plan, a set of plans that are available online that you can download. You can CNC fabricate all the parts, and you can build it without any skills and any tools in a day or two. Here again, when we look at the challenges of the large-scale refugee situations that we're watching happening in Europe right now, which is just the tip of the iceberg. We tend to think of that as a political situation, but what is driving the politics has been drought and ecological changes in the Mideast, which are driving people out of places like Syria as much as war. And there's an expectation of hundreds and hundreds of millions of people who will be moving around the planet, escaping coastal flooding, escaping drought. So the need for us to build shelter quickly. And by the way, we are also going to be one of the destination cities, a city that's far from the coast, that has a lot of fresh water, that's further north from some of the worst heat. And so we need to think about what would the Twin Cities do if we grew not by 1 million, but by 12 million, 15 million. What would we do when refugees start arriving at our doors? How would we accommodate them? And how would we, unlike some of the European countries, see them as a tremendous asset, as fueling our economy rather than as people to keep out? This, of course, will affect those who have been very much dependent on the old economy, and there's no question that industrial revolutions tend to affect some negatively. People who maybe are too old to retrain or to rethink how they might contribute to this economy. But it is happening all around us. We tend to pay a lot of attention on large corporations, where the economic action is in our cities is throughout these very small startups that are happening everywhere. And we need to recognize and encourage this. This is also leading to new kinds of buildings in our cities. There are buildings like this going up in San Francisco in which people live, work, and make things in the same building. And so what's interesting to me about this is a high-tech economy, and yet it actually is leading us back to the ways in which our great-great-grandparents used to live, where you would live above the store, and you might make goods out back, and you'd sell it out front. Now you may sell on Craigslist and eBay globally, but nevertheless, it is actually leading people to come back together. Because one of the other things about the sharing economy, as anybody who is a member of Car2Go or Our Car, you actually have to be close to others in order to share. And so even though this technology would suggest that we could live anywhere, we could disperse, what it's actually leading to is people coming back to live closer together so that they can have these more integrated, shared kinds of existences. It's also an innovation economy. It is one that is about people interacting. Cities have always been the cauldrons of new ideas. And that's why cities are so fundamentally important to this new economy. This is an economy that is radically democratic. When you do not have to be a person of wealth or have access to capital to start a very successful business now, but what you do need is you need a good idea. And so good ideas are hatched by having exposure to diversity, to people who are different from you, to artists who are making you think in playful new ways, to the unexpected, serendipitous kinds of interactions that happen in cities. These are fundamental to this new economy. And the more that we create cities that are not only walkable and healthy for us, as we heard Dan Buettner encouraging us to do, but that are enabling us to interact and exchange ideas in as many ways as possible with as many different kinds of people as possible, the better off we will be. These are some images of some of these new companies where people, their workspace really looks a little bit like an old warehouse, but where they're living, often working and making things in the same building. This is also about, as I mentioned earlier, about the empowerment of everybody, because in an innovation economy in which your ideas are what matters, you can't leave anybody behind. This is Juxtaposition Arts, one of the great institutions in the city, one that is nationally known for recognizing that people have multiple intelligences that are often suppressed in our educational system. One of our biggest problems is we have a mass production educational system. We have a 20th century educational system that runs students through standardized curriculum and they pop out the end with a degree. We treat our schools like they're assembly line factories, and we privilege a couple forms of knowledge, language and math being the primary forms of intelligence we privilege. We think of all the other forms of intelligence as just talents, when in fact the reality is, particularly in this economy, everybody's intelligent. Everybody has something to contribute, and we need to mass customize our educational system that allows people who are musically intelligent, for example, to learn everything through music, through what they're intelligent in. And this is a mass customized way of looking at education, and you see institutions like this emerging that, in fact, students, we work a lot with Juxta, students who always thought they were dumb, in fact, are just brilliant in another way. And the ability of this economy to allow them to thrive is really going to be part of our wealth. This is also an economy that has to be much more experimental. In my field, we talk a lot about pop-ups, which is the idea that we need to create opportunities in cities where people can experiment, that people can try things in very temporary ways and test them to see what ideas work well. Of course, this is a very old idea. You know, the idea of markets in Europe, in medieval cities, were just an example of this. So a lot of these ideas actually take us back to earlier forms of working and earlier forms of living in cities. We are working on an innovation district here in the Twin Cities by the university. Part of the goal of this is to see if we can actually create a place that would foster this new economy, that would kind of give birth to it, would provide a kind of focus for it. And it is an economy that is profoundly different in the way it thinks about resources. These are some of the new housing developments being built in Germany, completely off the grid. Even in a cold climate, they don't even have furnaces. They are passive houses where the body heat and the heat from the equipment is enough to heat a house in the coldest winter day. So these technologies exist. It's really more a matter of us recognizing that we can do this too. In fact, we're going to have to do this if we're going to be able to compete with other countries. There are, of course, downsides to this new economy. As we know, you can 3D print guns. You can use social media to attract people to join ISIS. You can use the online world to engage in human trafficking. I mean, every industrial revolution has a dark side, and law and legislation have got to catch up with the darker side of what this new economy is generating. But generally, I think it is one that has a lot of great advantages. Universities have got to change. I mean, one of the things we talk a lot at the University of Minnesota is that these kind of standardized curriculums, even departmental organizations have got to be questioned, mass customizing higher ed so that it's available to all people all the time in whatever mode is most convenient is, I think, the future of higher ed. It also is about engaging in the K-12 system and helping younger students recognize their intelligence and bring the kind of diverse disciplinary structure of the university down into the K-12 system. It's about rethinking what work is, as we've begun to see in the city with new kinds of co-working spaces where the best ideas often come from much more informal and fluid kinds of relationships. And it is also about letting people dream. One of the things that I think is characteristic of this new economy is that, as Rifkin said, in the old economy we lived to work. And the new one, the one in which one where people will succeed and where people will increasingly find happiness in health, is an economy it's about creativity, it's about connectivity, it's about innovation and inspiration, and it's really about learning how to live to play. That play in this economy is serious work, and rediscovering what it felt like to be a child, to imagine something that people haven't thought of, to sort of make the familiar strange and reimagine our future is really the economy that we need and where we're already headed to. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. I'm going to ask you to join our other panelists here up at the table. Again, this is exciting times as we're looking forward after talking about the last 100 years and what the next 100 years look like for us as a community. And Tom has helped to kind of set a stage for us to consider what things are right now, what they're possibly going to look like in the future, and some of the things that we need to really think about very seriously. Before I introduce our other guest panelists, I want to remind our participants that on your chairs you have this card that is for your opportunity to submit questions to our panelists as we go forward. And you have the opportunity to make this general, or if there's someone specific that you would like to have answer this, please note that. And in the back we have Nikki that will collect them, and Eric will also help us with your questions. But I will be setting off questions once I introduce our other panelists. Next to Thomas is Gary Cunningham. And Gary Cunningham is the Chief Executive Officer for MEDA, the Metropolitan Economic Development Association that works with minority-owned businesses and helping to develop their capacity to better serve our communities and hiring within our community and the region. Prior to joining MEDA, Gary was at the Northwest Area Foundation, so he was on the philanthropy giving side versus on the nonprofit side. And there he served as the Vice President of Programs and Chief Program Officer at the Northwest Area Foundation. Gary has his master's degree in public administration from Harvard University and is a leader in promoting economic growth and creating jobs and access to capital for us in the Twin Cities. So could we please welcome Gary? Next to Gary, we have Karen Doerr, who is the Executive Director of the Urban Land Institute, and she has a very extensive background in community planning, economic development, as well as real estate development. And she is known for the completion of a number of very successful initiatives and headline projects here in the Twin Cities, which perhaps she may talk about as well as part of our discussion. So welcome, Karen.
Thank you.
So we've had a number of presentations this morning and through our lunch period, and I don't know about you, but my mind is spinning. On one hand, I feel a great sense of hope and inspiration, and then I also have this great sense of what are we going to do? There's awesome sense of responsibility that goes hand in hand. And as Thomas said, for everything that we talk about, the possibilities and the opportunities for innovation, he teed it up very nicely in talking about the dark side as well as the positive or light side. And always being conscious of, for everything that we do as an action, there is a reaction. And how do we really consider that as we try to move forward and look at what our opportunities are going to be when we're talking about urban design and economic vitality for the next 20 or 50 years. What I'd like to do is to kick it off with both asking Karen and Gary if they had any other types of remarks or observations that they'd like to add to Tom's presentation.
I'd be happy to. Can you hear me? No. How about now?
No, you can.
Yeah, great. How about that way? Even more.
There.
Hell, I have to be Mariah Carey and eat the mic or something, right? Well, first of all, this is not in my bio, but I feel like you should know this. The only training I have is as a 5th grade teacher. That's where I started, in Highland Park, Illinois. And I think that training helped me do what I do now, which is to work with a lot of people who are really passionate, smart, learning. You're all here because you're curious. That's why you're here. And build trusted relationships so that we can do more things together. And Tom is on our advisory board. He's one of those folks. And I love the fact that you landed with this slide of people, because that's what I would really like to spend some time talking about. So I'll leave it there. Oh, and if I might, if you're interested in seeing Stratasys, we're doing a mobile tour there. Emily and Jeremy, you want to just raise your hand? If you're interested, we're doing a mobile tour there. Go see one of them after the session, and they can help you figure out how you can join that mobile tour.
This is a mural, by the way, from the Juxtaposition Art students.
Oh, great.
That's what it is.
Well, good afternoon. How's everybody? Good afternoon. Wake up. Get those seats. Tom did an excellent job, as he always does, raising both the positive aspects of the future as well as those aspects that we probably don't want to see but are here. I think one of the areas that I think he didn't focus on as much as I would have liked is one of the big issues facing us is economic inequalities. And so the question of our future, not only for people of color, but for white middle class people, is whether we're going to continue to see a deterioration of the well-being of the middle class within this country. And so if we project out the economic inequalities that have occurred between rich and poor within the country over the last, if we just look at the last 30 years and project that out, it's pretty scary, because we won't have a middle class to buy all these products. So yes, we will go into a less consumerism, but it will be at a huge cost to our productivity and our place. Alvin Toffler, who wrote Future Shock and The Third Wave, actually was one of the most influential thinkers on futurism in our time, actually talked about something called punctuated equilibrium, that everyone goes through. We go through cycles of things going fine, and then something happens. And now we call it the black swans that occur, like the crisis that we had in 2008 that we're really just coming out of in a real way. These things, with regards to the economy, they've been getting closer and closer together, meaning these kind of waves that occur that really throw us all into a tizzy and change our dynamics. So, I don't want to be Darth Vader up here with, like the empire is coming, but I do think we do need to think about how we're all in the same boat, that in fact opportunity for some is not positioned in the same way it is for others. And that doesn't mean based just on racial lines, it means based on economic lines, and that we really have to do something with the fundamentals of our system. I actually believe that capitalism is a great system, that we need to ensure its existence, but we also need to think about how we can ensure that everyone can participate in our economic vitality moving into the future. And I think if I were to critique Tom's talk, I think he focused more on the environmental than on the economic, and I think that's where we got to focus our energy, that we all do better when we all do better. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for the great questions that are coming up. We're going to keep them busy, I guarantee you with that. The next question, though, and maybe this is leading off a little bit what Gary said, and Tom, I think this is something that you had expressed that you'd like to be able to address maybe a little more thoroughly when you're talking about the resistance to change and trying to creating a more equitable and sustainable and economic city.
Yeah, well, and thank you, Karen and Gary, for your thoughts. I mean, it is interesting. I mean, if you accept the Ponzi idea that I brought up, the people who have the most to lose are the people who have the most money and the most power. The people who failed, who lost everything with Madoff, weren't the poor who were exploited. They were the rich who had the most invested. And I actually think that we may be in a moment in human history where the people who think we are the best off end up being in the worst shape. So I do think that we can't assume that the economy going forward will look anything like the economy that we have, because the economy we have isn't sustainable. I mean, Adam Smith, in the very beginning of The Wealth of Nations, said he wrote about capitalism, imagined capitalism to solve what he said was the paradox of value, which is, why do we not value water that we can't live without, and why do we value diamonds that we don't need? And I think we've not yet become capitalistic because we continue to waste human resource, we continue to pollute water, we continue to extinguish species, we continue to do the very things that Adam Smith thought capitalism should address. And one of the things about this is the matter of scale. I think we are caught politically in an old argument. Our politics is still between big government and big business. And I think both big government and big business are a 20th century way of thinking, that scale matters. In ecosystems, are made up of very small scale patches. And I think the economy of the future is not going to be about big government telling big business what to do. I think both of those are in deep trouble. And I think the reality is going to be a future economy that is much more local, much more empowering to individuals in local places. I think we're going to, as we already are starting to see, we're going to start to see local currencies, barter currencies that are emerging, Bitcoin, which is going to become a global exchange medium. And those who will prevail are the ones who have the best ideas and care about their local neighborhoods. Adam Smith said, you can't read Wealth of Nations unless you read my other book, which was a sort of highfalutin title called Theory of Moral Sentiment. But what he said is that you have to care about your neighbors, that capitalism succeeds when people care about the place they live in. And that, I would argue, is going to be, and has to be, the only sustainable economy going forward.
Karen?
So can I respond to that? So one of the things that ULI has the privilege of doing is convening regional mayors every month for 2 hours. They give their time. They come and work together on regional issues: housing, transportation, the environment. These are folks who are incredibly busy. Most of them, except for our main cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, are almost like volunteers. They get less than $10,000. Many of them do not have an office. And they work harder than I love suburban mayors. They care.
Right.
And they are out there in their communities every single night working with their communities. I had a conversation right before this session started with Tom Harmoning, who's here from St. Louis Park. And I hope, Tom, you have a chance to talk a little bit about what's going on in St. Louis Park. The folks who engage in the visions in their communities and translate, and then the working with their community staff to translate that into boots on the ground, like the Excelsior and Grand project, they care. Gary, the work that you're doing, you work with multiple communities of people who care. I get to engage with other people like me from around the globe, because ULI is a global organization, other executive directors like me. We are so lucky to be in this region. I honestly think that one of the key fundamentals of our economic vitality is because of the spirit that is in this community. We keep showing up as number one on so many indicators. Why is that? It's because of all of you in this room, all the things that you're part of, the volunteer hours that I know.
Yeah.
How many volunteer hours did you give to ULI this week? I mean, do you have a job other than, ULI?
I may not have.
I've got several people in this room represent our Young Leaders Group. Again, Emily and Jeremy, they're the co-chairs of our Young Leaders. I'm so inspired by the time that these folks are putting in, into their communities, changing the world, doing exactly what you're talking about.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I think building on some of the questions in your response, Karen, we have two questions that kind of align continually. Specifically, one directed to you, Karen, is a question about what are the most important factors and strategies in developing integrated mixed income neighborhoods in Minneapolis and going forward. And then a second question, and maybe this is to Gary or to Tom, as we build or shift to a new economy, how do we intentionally close the racial opportunity gaps that we see in jobs and education that have historically existed in the Twin Cities, and having action steps? So I think that
Thank you.
while we have great indicators broadly for the communities, but when we look specifically in communities of colors, we're seeing great disparities. So Karen, if you can address the first
Sure.
one on developing integrated mixed income neighborhoods, and maybe perhaps Gary to talk about how do we intentionally address those gaps.
Whoever asked that question, thank you very much. So sometimes small things really, really matter. We all say we want integrated mixed income communities. And yet, the financing tools that are available to do mixed income aren't there. If you're a developer and you try to do a mixed income project, it is nearly impossible. You can do an affordable housing project or you can do a high-end project. Look at all the stuff that's happening in Uptown right now, all the rental. There isn't any affordable housing in that. It's not because the developers don't want to build affordable housing. They would love to do that. It's the numbers don't work. You know that we're all trying to figure out how to live in more walkable neighborhoods. Well, the truth is it's so much harder to do that in something that's built up already as opposed to doing it from scratch. So when we built out our city, there was a lot of federal money that was flowing to this town that built all that stuff. Today, when a developer is trying to do a mixed income integrated place with all the amenities that we all love, there aren't any federal dollars that are supporting that. It has to come out of their pocket or their city or the philanthropic community. So I could say a lot more about this. The urban dilemma that we have is the places and the communities that we say we want, we have to back it up with investment and electing people who are going to have the courageous leadership to make those kinds of places happen.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you. All right.
And he's married to the mayor, that's why.
So I was going to say, Karen, that you love all the suburban mayors. I actually love one mayor in particular.
She gets a little more money than they do.
So
That's
So I am also on the Metropolitan Council, and part of the question of what kind of community, what kind of place do we want to be, is a complex question, because depending on where you're at and what you want and what you can afford, you can actually live in different places of this community and not connect with other people or places within this community, and that's the way it's been for a long time. Our policies have designed the situation we have. It's not like things have happened kind of accidentally. It's just like Dan Buettner was saying earlier with the food systems and what happens there. That's true on all different levels, be it economic, be it social, et cetera. We have designed the policies that we want to see in the community, and the dynamics of the question of integration or housing, mixed income housing, however you want to frame this, is around questions of who you want to live next door to, what schools you want your children to go to, where you want who you want to socialize with in your day-to-day activities. And people have grouped themselves by race, class, and place within our community that has created a very inefficient, ineffective system for future growth and development. When Karen talks about that there's not enough money in the system to provide the mixed income housing, the fact of the matter is we've actually develop policies that maintain affordable housing in some communities, low-income housing, and not in others. And that these policies that we have maintain some groups of people being able to be closer to opportunity and connected within opportunity structures, and other people not being able to be connected to those structures. And the policies have also created the conditions whereas when the groups that are soon to be the majority, which are very poor, start moving up in our system, it creates a dynamic by which they feel like they haven't been treated well or right within the systems that we have. So you end up with a very polarized debate about how do we move forward. I think a way out of this conundrum is to look at it in terms of we all have universal goals that we agree upon. We all want our kids to do well in school. We all want good health care. We all want good jobs and decent play. I think I haven't talked to anybody in the universe that hasn't wanted that. So we agree on things universally. But I think we need to be clear that we actually need to shift our resources so that we are targeting folks that aren't connected to opportunity in the same way. And we can do that, we could actually do that in a race-neutral way. Depending on how you're connected to opportunity, you could actually have certain resources that are provided to you so that you could move up in the system so that everybody can do better. For example, I'll just take this minute. Minneapolis, and I'll just take Minneapolis, when the crisis hit with foreclosures in Minneapolis, certain parts of the community took a higher hit on taxes because other parts of the community weren't built up enough to actually sustain the tax base. So many of us took hits because we hadn't paid enough attention and made the right investments in all aspects in our community. If we continue to go down this road and as populations that are people of color and low income and low assets aren't paid attention to, then we will all continue to have to pay. And you can't move yourself out of it. You can't move to a further suburb to move away from it because the issue is all of our issue and will affect us all together equally. So.
Right.
You know, just a follow-up, if I may. Sure. Tom had mentioned suburban, the suburban growth. One of the dynamics that's happening in our region right now is that cities are becoming much more attractive. And you're seeing a huge rise in poverty in suburban communities where you're not connected to transit, right, which makes it even harder for people to make the move. And to maintain affordability in Minneapolis and St. Paul and those first-ring suburbs is going to be tougher and tougher and tougher.
So I think building on things being tougher and tougher, we have kind of a series of questions that kind of link to that, and why some of these are specifically addressed to each one of the panelists. I'm going to have to give you all the opportunity to respond. So generally, do you think that the trends you're describing will lead to less or more economic inequality in the United States? Will the poor in the U.S. be better off or worse, and why? And overlaying that, there is a question, if we're expecting this huge influx of a population 5 times faster due to massive immigration or migration, how are we going to accommodate this when we're talking about systems of having an underclass or groups that don't have equal opportunities? So this is a very kind of complex.
I'll start because I just have a very simple response to that. I'm really worried about the economic pyramid in our country. I just think that the salaries at the top, even if you discount the fact that there's, that there are always people who do better and worse, those salaries at the top are criminal. And I don't get why, I'll leave it at that. I think you look at that from those slides that were up today, and we all know this. I mean, what people are making in a year, it boggles your mind. And I think that's a very serious problem for our country. Very serious.
Tom?
Well, poverty is a design. It's a construct, you know. Even the idea of poverty is a relatively recent phenomenon of an industrial revolution that started to separate the wealth from the poor. When you go back far enough in history, people who lived in local economies, who did many of the things we heard Dan Buettner talk about in some of these blue zone communities, who looked after each other, they didn't feel impoverished, right? And so the system I'm talking about that is completely unsustainable is one that impoverishes people. And we've got to stop impoverishing people. It is an outcome of a couple hundred-year skew, a sort of a perverse way of thinking about economics that I was arguing is not only unsustainable, but probably likely to collapse. Despite its appearance that some people are making all this money and that they can insulate themselves from it. So I don't know when it's going to collapse. I don't know what it's going to be, whether it'll be an environmental shock that's going to lead us to this, whether it'll be an economic shock, whether we're just going to start to see refugees moving around the planet, as some predict. But we created poverty. And to me, it's the sign that the system needs to change.
So maybe, Gary, maybe you can talk, what do you see as what some of the opportunities, things that are working, things that maybe that you see through your work, both at MEDA, at the council, your previous history of doing this, that
Yeah,
you're actually seeing gaining some traction or are actually working?
Well, that was a softball. Surely take that. So the reason that I work for MEDA is because I believe that we need to use the tools of our system to make social change happen. And part of that means is how do we create economic opportunity for all? And how do we do that in a way that everyone can participate in our system at an equal basis so that the system works equally well for everyone? So MEDA actually last year, just here in the Twin Cities, had worked with minority-owned businesses that represented about $1.4 billion in revenue. Those businesses actually created about 8,000 jobs. And of those 8,000 jobs, 51% of the people working there were people of color. There is no other match to the economic opportunity for people at all levels. The average job was about $22 an hour with the 85% of those jobs with full benefits. So think about if we're able to grow that as an economic engine within this community, and we're able to create that opportunity, because you know what, at the end of the day, there's only two ways to prosperity. One, either you're gonna have a job or you're gonna be an entrepreneur. Unless you're into illegal activities or something, those are the only two ways within our society that you're going to get ahead. Is that right? Everybody understand that? So if we're not working to create economic engines in communities to make people viable with regards to their economic condition, then we're creating conditions for them to do other things within our society that we actually don't want to have happen, crime, other things like that. And we're not creating an ethos within community to actually thrive, because if in fact I do everything right and then I still can't make it within the society, then I'm actually going to rebel against society. So we're creating the conditions by not creating the economic opportunity. So, but the problem is we're not making the investments necessary. Within the economic space that we have of those that are creating businesses for people of color within our community, within this community, we're only spending $10 million a year in their operating. And I'm talking about all the organizations that are nonprofit working in this space, and the loan fund, the capital. So you can't have capitalism without capital, right? I mean, it's like the ingredient. The capital that's available for minority firms is only $20 million a year in capital that goes out by what they call community development financial institutions in the Twin Cities for minority-owned businesses. So if that's all, and you're dealing with hundreds of billions of dollars that come into this region a year for economic opportunity. We need to ensure that we're making sure that economic opportunity is getting to all communities.
I agree.
Kind of following that, Gary, there was a question about, what is going to make it easier for entrepreneurs to start business? And our speaker this morning was talking about overhead. I'm that overhead. Key things that we're missing in nonprofits. What's missing for entrepreneurs to support them in their development?
Well, I could keep you here all afternoon, but I won't. I think the key, when we've done surveys of our clients and customers and our stakeholders, the main thing is capital. Meaning, if you don't have capital to run your business and you don't have that capital at a reasonable rate, you're not going to be in business very long. And so the question for entrepreneurs of color particularly is getting them capital, but also surrounding them with business support services so that they can be successful. Meaning if they actually don't have the technical expertise to be successful and you give them money, then a lot of times those loans don't work out. But if you provide technical, and this has been proven, this is not like rocket science or something that people can't understand. If you provide technical assistance and support, so what we're talking about at the end of the day is jobs, right? People have to have jobs and opportunity, right? And so what we need is to be able to grow businesses. And we're not just talking about, when people think about minority businesses, they start thinking about, well, we need a barbershop or a store in the neighborhood. Well, that's fine, but we really need to build larger businesses and businesses of scale in order to get at the problem, the underlying issues that we're trying to do. And what happens is once people get into business, right, then their kids have a greater chance of getting into business. And it has just all these externalities and these other effects that go on for people that are connected with people in business. So I actually believe we've got the solution. And the solution isn't to do away with capitalism. The solution is to actually make sure that capitalism happens for everyone. So,
Joanne, if I could add one
Yes.
thing to this. Gary, your comment about the resources that are available, one of the challenges we have in this region is we are risk adverse. So to start a new business, you think about, I just finished reading Ed Catmull's book on creativity, the Pixar. It was a wonderful book. I would recommend reading it. You have to have the ability to get the capital and fail and not mean that you're out of the game. So what do they call that? Early death money or something. So there's a new entrepreneurial organization called Venture Lake that I'm sure you're working with. But it's the ability to try and fail and try and fail and try and fail until you get it right. And our system is set up so that once you've failed, you have this black mark,
Right.
and that really puts a damper on innovation.
well, I don't have anything against black marks, but I do want to say that I just want to give you this data here because this is relevant to what you just said. So a study's coming out today that shows from 2007 to 2012, minority businesses grew at 53% in Minnesota, and non-minority businesses declined by 3%. Minority businesses achieved a 58% growth rate in sales during that same period. Non-minority businesses grew by only 30%. We're seeing a shift. A shift is happening right now in front of us of what for minority businesses within our area. So I could go on with this data. Minority businesses have grown at a greater rate than any other business group within Minnesota. So if we don't start making these investments now, this is going to occur. This trend that I just talked about is going to continue going into the future. All of our futures are tied together. It's not like I can go over here and do something and stay away from you. We are actually, so helping these businesses grow, helping them to ensure that they're financially viable and bankable is like the ointment, if you will. If there's one thing you could do, right? And somebody gave you $1 billion, if there's one thing you could do, you'd have to invest in this as opposed to all the social service programs combined. Now, I'm not against social service programs, But in part, some of the dynamics of the social service system have created the conditions that we find ourselves in. So I'll just put that out there to be a little controversial.
Speaking of another part of our population that's marginalized are the elderly, the retiring baby boomer population. That, I mean, we are headed toward a future where there are going to be a lot of very still healthy people who get marginalized upon retirement. And there's also a conversation that's been starting in the city about, instead of in your retirement years just packing lunches at the soup kitchen, which is a good thing to do, is to actually realize these are former, bankers, lawyers, doctors, and
Executive directors.
help them mentor new businesses, use their knowledge, and help them have a purpose. As we heard from Dan Buettner, having a purpose is a big part of longevity. So our problem with our system is we marginalize these populations, be they populations of color, be they the elderly and retirees, be they young people. And we've got to stop doing that. Part of this is to recognize that everybody has something to contribute and is valued in the economy.
Absolutely.
So that was one of the questions about older and aging population, but now would you like to go to the other side and talking about how do we engage young people into reshaping our strategies for urban environment and economic vitality?
Yeah, it's there. You saw I forget who it was that asked everybody to stand up based on their age and then sit down.
Alicia Hawkins.
Thank you. Yeah. So more than half the room, more than half the population. Our own young leaders are actively engaged. We have a Next 10 group, I know, at the university. I mean, I see this happening all over the place. The demographics are visibly shifting, which is a really great thing.
Yeah, the millennial population is the largest part of our workforce now.
Yeah,
And you can see it.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to be a judge at the Minnesota Cup this year. And for those of you that don't know, this is a competition that the Carlson School puts on for aspiring entrepreneurs and creative, inventive ideas. The whole room was filled with young people with fantastic ideas, and it was multiracial, multicultural. It was fantastic to see when young people are given the opportunity and there's an incentive there, how many of them are coming out and saying, we want to participate in the next generation of what this society has to offer, and how positive and forward-thinking they are. Meaning, where
They don't have
we
to-
get cynical in our older age, not me, of course, but, the kind of wellspring of resources. So I think opening up opportunities of leadership, ladders of opportunities for young people is critical. I think a lot of times they don't know how to get into leadership. So if, for example, one of the things that I've been working on is a leadership academy for African American leaders within the community, but it's all around young leaders within the community and connecting them with leaders that have been there so that we actually get a new generation of leaders that are thinking differently. And I think this is going on in many of the communities of color, is how do you move them up? And I think throughout what I'm seeing is a transformation that's occurring right before our eyes about who will be making the decisions going into the future. And we want to make sure we keep those intergenerational connections going as we do this.
I mean, this new economy I'm talking about is an entrepreneurial economy. We're in an entrepreneurial revolution right now. I mean, all of the opportunities are not about sort of training to take your job in a hierarchy. You talk to young people, they don't want to work their way up some corporate ladder anymore. They want to start and change the world right now. And it's the kind of things you see at Carlson, but we have got to change our K-12 education system because it is repressive and it is preparing us for the old economy in the last century. And until we help people recognize and develop entrepreneurial skills at a very early age, it's too late by the time you get to the Carlson School.
I totally
Yeah,
agree with
I
that.
agree as well.
But I do think, for some reason, Minnesota in particular has had the hardest time changing its fundamental systems like K-12 because we've been locked in a polarizing debate between two right sides, if you will, around that debate. And unless we can break the logjam around that, we will continue to stay stuck in a system that has feedback loops that maintain the status quo.
The next questions are for Tom, and this is talking about new economies and new generations. How does your thinking around must be local square with the globalization of networks and relationships, so in many ways local is of less value, and that you had described a new generation of people that value mobility, but there are those that still want to have something that's very local and neighborhood based?
Yeah, I think that we're at a time where it's paradoxical. We're global and local at the same time. In fact, a lot of people call this the glocal economy because, and in a way, this is part of the empowerment, which is you can have a very specialized product or service, but you have a global market in order to sell it in. But a lot of the production and the ability to innovate really has to happen at a local level. I mean, again, it's a kind of an ecosystem way of looking at human organizations. The rest of nature is organized in small patches. We have a global environment, but every ecosystem is local. And we're the only species that doesn't operate that way. We're the only species that produce waste, by the way. You know, we have thought of ourselves as exceptional, as different from every other animal. We are not different. We are like every other animal. We've organized our systems improperly, counter to the way the natural world is organized. And when we start to organize ourselves as social and human ecosystems, we will find, like nature, that we are both local and global all the time and simultaneously.
So could you say a little bit more about making the familiar strange?
Well, I mean, a whole other part of my life is about design thinking and creativity. And, you know, it's interesting, when you go to a playground and you give creativity tests to young people, over 90% score really high. And then as you give this test to kids as they age, around 4th grade, they start to plummet. And if you give creativity tests to high schoolers, only about 10% score high. We have an educational system that makes us feel embarrassed about being creative. We are inherently a playful species. And the trick now is our economy wants us to be creative, and we have an educational system that is driving it out of us and making us feel embarrassed by it. And so play, which is what kids know how to do, is about invention. It's about creativity. Creative people remember what it was like to be a kid. And we all have to go back to sort of remembering that and being open to the playfulness of the playground, and realizing that that is serious business. I mean, this is how the new businesses, the new services, the new world will be created.
I encourage you to keep your questions coming. They're very good, and I'm trying to categorize these a little bit as I provide these to our panelists. Again, we're talking about kind of balancing. This is not a simple issue. When we're talking about space for the natural world that we live in, you know, how do we avoid over-designing in our world and erasing the natural landscape, especially in considering the situation Tom posed in needing to prepare for the influx of populations to our community?
So can I start that one?
Sure.
I'm very excited about a new initiative that ULI is working on with the Science Museum of Minnesota. They are hope to put up an exhibit on cities, both the past, the current, and the future of cities. I think science museums are an underused resource for civic engagements. For the first time in history, ever, there are more people that live in cities than not. This is a huge environmental issue for us. Cities are where innovation comes from, and it's where we really have to be paying attention to environmental impact issues. I want to raise a concern that I have. I think that I worry that we've lost our appetite for bold endeavors. And Tom Evers is here representing the Minneapolis Parks Foundation. We enjoy an extensive parks and open space network here. We enjoy a magnificent set of cultural institutions here. And I worry, I think I'm answering that question. I'm worried that we're losing our appetite and our courage and are willing to invest in bold endeavors that are so central to what makes this a great place for everybody.
Well, I'd like to, put my Metropolitan Council hat on just for a moment, because I think the council has done some fantastic work over the years. So not just this council, but other councils in, one, creating one of the best urban bike trails and regional trails in the country. I mean, if you've used our regional trail system, it's fantastic. We also have preserved land, ag land, and other land within the region that don't have the same kind of controls that we have been able to put in place. Is it perfect? No. There are other cities like Portland and et cetera that have actually done more and better, I think, than us with respect to that. But there are guidances with regards to our economic and regional growth strategies that we've had in place for 50 years that have helped protect more of our regional land than other places across the country, I would argue. And so, in part, we've done some of that. We haven't done enough of it. And then there's not only that boundary issue, there's the inside each of these city areas. And I do think there is more attention being paid now than ever before to how do we green downtown, as an example. There's a whole effort about greening downtown and making sure that we infill this vacant lots and other things that Tom was talking about earlier. As they arise, that we actually put green space within them. So I think there is a huge effort of being focused from the city, from the county, and from the metropolitan in our region to try to focus on this. We'll never be able to do enough because I think we're behind, so we're always trying to catch up with it. But I do think that there are at least systems in place to preserve some of the land that we cherish with regards to green space.
Yeah. At ULI had a panel yesterday, and Councilmember Fry talked about 770 some publicly owned sites in Minneapolis that are unused. And so begin to think about whether if we let neighborhoods start to take those over, have community gardens, urban ag, use them for recreational purposes. I mean, we have lots of these opportunities that are right in front of us. But one reason I'm, like Karen, heavily involved in parks is parks are the place where people come together. Our city keeps, people apart by economic and ethnic divisions, and parks have always been historically the place where we all can find common ground. And I think it's key to our future.
So do you have some examples that we could follow, where you see that they are implementing some of these policies and strategies to add more green space? Who's doing it better? And we're behind, so who's doing it better? Who would be our model? Who would be an example?
Well, I said earlier, I had the opportunity to do quite a bit of work in Portland over a period of time. And one of the things, so history matters, right? So the state of Oregon actually, in the 60s, created a preservation law that covered the whole state and focused in on, and then Portland took that law and actually amped it up, meaning made it even more. So when you go to Portland, you'll see a lot of green, not a lot of development going on, because they have really contained their development in the core. And so you can't actually build outside the core. I mean, it's very strict there in terms of what you can do.
And
so
the housing costs there are very high.
And the housing costs are high.
It's had a consequence.
Absolutely,
good or bad.
absolutely. And from a point of view of equity and access, they also have created some real issues around there, because when they built their transit out, and this has happened in every city that transit's been built in, low-income people then have to be transferred somewhere else because of the rising costs. So it's happening everywhere. So if you go to San Francisco, as an example, which is a beautiful city, low-income people, there's hardly any low-income people that live in San Francisco proper anymore. They've all had to move to the West Bay or the East Bay, in part because of the rising market rates that have got for housing that have gotten created around these issues. That doesn't mean they've done everything wrong, but we can learn from them. That's why it's so important that as you're creating transit and multimodal transit systems, to ensure that you have mixed income communities that can thrive throughout the line or the area. Because if you don't, the market will force low-income people out because higher-income people will come in and what they call gentrify those communities. We can actually learn from those experiences and do better by our communities here than they've done elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, what happens in San Francisco, I mean, this is part of the dilemma we face is we have well-intentioned policies that drive up costs. I mean, San Francisco refuses to allow tall buildings to be built. So no wonder everything is expensive. They've put boundaries on themselves. We're doing a workshop with Hennepin County on extremely affordable family housing, which the marketplace here cannot provide. Well, one reason we can't provide it, we have many very well-intentioned policies. All labor has to be union. All units have to be handicapped accessible. All of those are good things. But what they do is they drive up the cost, so now we can't house families. So maybe there's part of this new economy and way of thinking is to say, maybe for extremely affordable family housing, we waive some of those requirements because there are ways we can bring the cost down if we would just let ourselves do it. And so again, I think that part of the public sector, we've been doing design thinking work, is to help the public sector realize they've got to be more experimental and not always think that everything is kind of set, has to be applied everywhere all the time in the same way. We create a kind of rigidity, and then when we wonder why we can't afford anything, why should we be surprised?
So leading off on that a bit, how do you create that movement? And the question here is, what are each of you doing within your organizations to help communities organize, to close some of these gaps or address some of these issues that we're facing, and as we look forward as well?
So I want to thank Kraus Anderson again for sponsoring this. One of the things that if ULI had a tagline, it would be, what can I do and what can we do together? We're trying to help move away from a culture of finger pointing, why aren't they doing da-da-da-da-da-da, whatever that is. It's really about all of us. We are very focused on connecting public sector leaders and private sector leaders, oftentimes in small group experiences so they get to know each other and break down the barriers and learn together. I think that, again, as I said in my opening remarks, I really believe in the power of people to move an idea. It will start with you, it'll move to a friend, it'll move to your family, moves to a neighborhood, it moves everywhere. Gary mentioned our bike network here. I don't think that started out as a massive government program. It started out with the biking community really advocating and promoting and doing it. We've become an incredible foodie town. How did that happen? Do you remember when the only place you could eat was well, I used to like the Lincoln Dells, so I'm dating myself. But how did that happen? So the kinds of things that Tom is talking about, in some ways, we don't have to do anything, just get out of the way. In other ways, I still am going to hold to my idea about these bold endeavors. They require leadership and courage and investment. And yes, the Met Council is doing many wonderful things.
I belong to a number of organizations that the Twin Cities, Minnesota is so lucky to have people at all levels doing all types of things to make a difference in our community. And it sets us apart in many ways, meaning from working with folks at the Metropolitan Council to being on the board of the Minneapolis Foundation. All of these organizations are organizations that are working to make a difference. I would say what I am seeing and the most promising work that I see going on is the collaboration between communities of color that are coming together, seeing that they have a common interest instead of their separate identity interests, to work together to make a difference across the board in their community. I think this movement of a coalition of communities of color is probably one of the things that I see that will really make a difference. Because if you're not at the table when decisions are being made, you are on the menu. And so I just say that I think them stepping up to the plate and being part of our social infrastructure, being part of our advisory committees or boards, et cetera, and our whole structure really makes a difference. And it can't be just people going out and saying we want more people of color on our board. We really have to have people of color willing to step forward and be part of the infrastructure, and being willing to be at the table to make the decision and the consequences for those decisions as they happen. That's critical.
One of the things we're working on at the university, I mean, one of our advantages is we're an urban land grant. So part of our mission is to work on community work, and we're right in the middle of this incredible city. And increasingly, I think we view that students, not just college students, but also K-12 students, want to make a difference. This idea that we have to hold kids apart in these buildings, keep them away from the societies that they're in until they're somehow adults, is crazy. There is so much talent and energy on the part of kids of all ages to be engaged in their community, to actually learn by doing. And so part of the transformation that is started at the university, and I hope moves through the K-12 system, is to get students out of the classroom and let them learn by hands-on work that makes a difference, that's meaningful to their community. Worked on a project with colleagues in a Roosevelt High School in Los Angeles where they took a class of kids who were flunking, and they gave them all GIS, a Geographic Information System, tools. They found all the problems and they mapped all the problems in their neighborhood in Los Angeles. Not only did they embarrass the mayor of LA and they brought changes to their community, every one of those kids got a free ride to college. And their grades completely turned around. They went from flunking to being near the tops of their class. And to me, they're the same kids. We just let them learn differently. And so part of this is a revolution that has to happen in the way we view young people.
So maybe this also ties into the question about Helsinki, Finland. And it was named the 2012 Design Capital of the World. And they focus on design experience. And perhaps this is some of the question is, what other types of models or what's working out there that kind of emulates Helsinki and the Finns? That came to my mind when we were talking about this as an experiential project for students.
Yeah, I was talking this morning to a group here from Uppsala, Sweden. You know, the thing about what's happening in our field, the design fields, is that people tend to think that we're people who mainly care about the way things look. And actually, that is much less of an interest in my fields as it is about that design is about how do we take the world that we have and we make it a better place. And so a lot of the design thinking work we're doing is not about making things look pretty, but in fact making them work better. And that's not just in the physical environment, it's all these invisible systems and policies and structures that we have that are keeping us back from leading better lives. And so I think that you know, what we have to learn from other countries is that they have been doing a better job recognizing problems and redesigning systems. We talk about Finland. Finland's K-12 system is world-renowned for its ability to engage students, and they're at the very top of the educational system of the globe because they've been open to experimentation, they've empowered teachers, given them independence, and they've let students help co-create the learning experiences that they want to learn in. Recently I taught a class, we're in nomadic. I said, we're not going to meet in this classroom. I let my students pick where they wanted to learn. Never once did they pick a classroom to learn in. They picked coffee shops, we learned on the light rail line, we went everywhere else. And so if you empower students to help co-create where and how they want to learn, we'll be amazed. And Finland has been doing that.
You know, I think one of the challenges we have is to get beyond the closed fist and instead be in the extended. And so much of these issues get stopped by the closed fist. So I was intrigued by the question this morning, Carrie Miller asked, why is it that when you talk about individuals, they're filled with hope and creativity and innovation, and yet the group can be not that way? And she asked him, why is that? And he didn't have an answer. Well, I'd like, the attempt for any of you that have been part of any public process, when that negative closed-fisted energy emerges, it's very, very difficult to shut that down without somehow entering into it and doing combat yourself, and most of us don't want to. So what has to happen is the movement, you use the word movement, that is bigger than that. And that's all of us. And that together, to not let the closed fist rule the day. And there's too much closed fists in the education system right now.
Yeah, so from a practical perspective, and I don't know about the Finland issue, but I do know that we've been looking at Finland probably 30 years and say we should repeat their apprenticeship program, or we should repeat their, so this idea of, and some of it may trickle in, but most of it doesn't, and so we keep having that conversation. I would argue that we have to think about what is our infrastructure investments within the community. So say we have East St. Paul, which is a very low-income community, and North Minneapolis, or West St. Paul, which we know is very poor. And we actually got agreement on what is the land use that we want to have happen, what is the community that we actually want with community input. And then we had agreement about what are those investments that we need to make that happen over the next 10 to 15 years. If we could get that type of agreement about the type of investments that we need to make in the infrastructure, and these are when I say infrastructure, I'm talking about the underlying conditions by which economic opportunity, economic development occur. So you need certain kind of conditions for that to happen. If we could get agreement on those public investments, because all institutions right now are making investments, but they're not doing it in sync with one another. They're not doing it in a collaborative way with one another because of history of bad relations or what have you. But if we could actually get there and have agreement about, for example, that we're going to do economic development. So right now, I'll just take an example just real quickly. Right now, Metropolitan Council is invested along Penn Avenue. We're doing a study on doing rapid bus transit there. We're doing a study on streetcars on Broadway. We're doing an analysis of changing the Fremont bus system so that it actually serves people better. If we were to combine those with the county's investment, which is over $200 million a year in investment that the county is making, and the city investment, and we actually started having those collaborative conversations, and then we said to the communities, what kind of community what kind of place you want to be, and we made those investments together, we could make that work. But there is dysfunction within those systems in order to make that happen, and that dysfunction exists because we allow it to exist as citizens.
One final question. We have 2 minutes left. What's your wish for Minneapolis in the next 20 years? Tom?
Recognize we're full of untapped assets. People, human assets, land assets, natural assets. We are so wealthy. We think of ourselves as impoverished. We are wealthy beyond imagining. We don't allow ourselves to recognize where the real wealth lies. Capital is only one form of wealth, and because we haven't tapped all our other forms of wealth, we feel poor. We are rich. We have to take advantage of it.
Gary?
My wish for Minneapolis is that we address the school system question of educating our children. I think if we don't, all these other systems are built on being able to educate our children well. And if we're not educating our children well, then all of this other stuff is great, but it's not going to get us to the kind of community we want it to be. So we need to really fix that in the next 20 years to be successful.
Karen?
I'm with Gary.
Yeah.
So could we please have a round of applause for our panel and presenters?
Good job, Gary. Good job. Thank you.